Hi, hello, everybody. Welcome to our panel on Harmonizing Identities, exploring the intersection of art, healing, and identity among Indigenous queer artists. Welcome and thank you for joining us today here on Zoom. Again, to talk a little bit more about the intersection of Native art and how it really brings Indigenous queer artists together in order to really convey and share their experiences as queer Indigenous folk through culture and through traditional art. So without further ado, let me just go ahead and give a little bit of a background to myself. My name is Keana Gorman. I am a member of the Diné Nation, and I currently reside in Salina, Arizona, which is where I am originally from. And I am the Advancement Communications Coordinator for the First Peoples Fund and the host and moderator for this wonderful panel. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists and just give a little bit of background on the community that they are from and the art medium that they work with. And these are all folks who have been affiliated with First Peoples Fund through one of our fellowships or one of our means of networking. So first and foremost, I would like to introduce our panelist, Golga Oscar, who is a member of the Kasigluk Elders Traditional Council of the Yupik Nation and is currently living in the Kasigluk, Alaska town. And his primary art mediums are photography, quill work, weaving, and textiles. Golga was also a 2023 Artist and Business Leadership Fellow with the First Peoples Fund, and this is how we have gone to know him. So everyone welcome Golga. And our next panelist is Penny Kagigebe, who is a member of the White Earth Ojibwe type. And main art mediums that she works with are basketry, quill work, beadwork, and sewing. Penny is a 2023 Cultural Capital Fellow with the First Peoples Fund. And so thank you so much for being here with us, Penny. And our final panelist is Kenny Ramos, who is a member of the Barona Band of Mission Indians and the Kumeyaay Nation. Kenny is a storyteller and works in theater and acting, and is a previous 2019 Cultural Capital Fellow with the First Peoples Fund. All of our panelists today are all Indigenous and queer identifying. All of these folks, of course, work with different art mediums and incorporate their identities as both queer and Indigenous in their own unique ways within the artwork that they do. And it is through this artwork that they have conveyed and shared emotions, experiences, and really overall healing and the journey that they've taken with that through art and specifically Indigenous art. And something that I have thought about before plenty of time is just how Indigenous art exists at this really beautiful nexus of um, art, healing, culture, tradition. And really, I think it exists in such a unique place that a lot of our queer and trans identifying Indigenous people tend to gravitate towards a lot of these spaces. And I think I myself have ventured into a lot of different Indigenous art spaces and have found a lot of healing and belonging with specifically Navajo art. So, like the songs that we use within our ceremonies and the different symbolism that we include within our ceremonies is something that I have studied as a part of my research. And I, you know, primarily focused on sort of like the history of it, but I think it's really interesting how it seemed almost very natural that I gravitated toward this very specific area within Indigenous society, that being the area where we make art. And I think something that's really interesting is that for us as Indigenous people, art is more than just like art. It's not just like an abstract concept or like hobby for a lot of us. A lot of the symbolism that we use within our art contains philosophies, it contains practices and traditions that have been passed down for generations. It connects us very intimately, emotionally, and spiritually to our land, our philosophy, our epistemologies. For an example, like Navajo ceremonies, like a lot of what has been studied is our symbolism, and a lot of our symbolism is often seen as aesthetic because we paint with mineralized sand as a part of our ceremonies, well, some of our ceremonies, and those are known as sand paintings. And a lot of non-Navajo people, specifically a lot of like the white anthropologists that would come and study, were really interested in this art medium because it was very unique and temporary. But I think a fundamental part of what a lot of these anthropologists did not understand at first is that this is more than just art. This was not just something that we would do uh, for like a pastime. These were representations of the mountains, the different natural elements that exist within us, around us, and those things hold power within our ceremonies. And I think something that's really that is, I guess, at the core of Native art is just healing. And so I think what's very unique about our panelists today is that we have all, again, um, looked to art and our cultures and our communities to find healing and to really harmonize um, our identities, because often as queer Indigenous folk, um, a lot of us tend to feel that we exist sort of like outside of our own communities because of homophobia, transphobia, and different attitudes that sort of are against like being queer and being trans. And so I think a lot of queer and trans Indigenous people look to our culture and our art to find that healing, to harmonize our identities, to understand our identities. And I, for one, looked at, quote unquote, Navajo art to really understand what it means to be, quote unquote, two spirit within my own culture. And so, with that, I would like to sort of introduce our questions for our panel today. So first and foremost, I want to ask about how art has helped you as an individual to discover who you are as an Indigenous person, as a queer person, and just wholeheartedly as a person. Are there ways that you can express yourself through art that you cannot do otherwise? Um, so that's our first question. Previously, we had technical difficulties with our Zoom account, and therefore our recording was interrupted. So I'm just going to provide a little bit of context to some of the responses that our panelists gave in the following clip. So the overall conversation was being wrapped up. And with this final question of, if you were to share any piece of advice to our queer Native youth, what would you tell them? And previously, like leading up into this question, we had talked a lot about two-spirit identity and how queerness often does not encapsulate a lot of the Indigenous philosophy surrounding two-spirit identities and queer identities, and how that has often created like this weird little tension within, I guess, like within ourselves, within our communities as queer Indigenous folk, in that often it feels like we are searching for the meaning of what it means to be two spirit, and really, I guess, like what it means to be queer, what it means to be Indigenous, and what it means to really exist at those crossroads. And a lot of the memorable quotes um, that were in response to those questions. Well, every panelist said very memorable quotes and very memorable points. But I think one that strongly resonated with me is Penny had said, if we exist as unique people with unique gifts, we need to grow into that instead of push it away. Because there are certain gifts that we bring to our people and our community that only we can bring. And Goga said that there was a similar saying in their culture that, and it was a saying that goes, if you don't take up the spot, who else will take it? And so I think really from that conversation, what we pull is like, we're not fully going to ever understand what it means to be two spirit. And for a lot of our communities and our cultures, that type of knowledge has been lost. And a lot of those conversations have been obscured. A lot of those stories that are relevant to two spirit history and two spirit knowledge are, if not intentionally obscured and erased or sanitized, they're often sort of kept away and just not talked about and not really documented either. And so, really, the problem that we sit with today as contemporary, I guess, like not contemporary, but like as what we deal with today as queer Indigenous youth, having to grapple with contemporary queer mainstream identities and practices and culture, having to grapple with that and having to also grapple with what it means to be two spirit in your own community, what it means to be queer and Indigenous within your own community can create a lot of tension. And a lot of that tension can result in, isolation. It can result in depression. It can result in, a lot of um, us ending up in vulnerable situations. And Kenny had also talked about uh, how he uses his art to um, bring about awareness on two spirit violence, violence against two spirit people, and Indigenous women. And yeah, so that's just a little bit of context as to what we were discussing leading up to this final question. And um, our conversation flowed very naturally to this very last question. And I had also just talked about how I myself, as an Indigenous trans woman, have experienced very similar things within my community and within my research. And I asked the panelists, like, what would your advice be to a 22-year-old freshly graduated from college, starting a new job, and trying to discover myself and to understand myself, within the context of my own community, but also just within the broader society. And so these were the responses to that question. And this is the conversation that really followed from that. So I hope you really enjoy the wisdom that our panelists had to share. And I, for one, am very grateful for all of the wonderful pieces of advice and wisdom that they shared with us. And yeah. Um, but again, as we said, queerness and indigeneity are both very complex identities, especially in a world and a society that doesn't value either of those identities or value either those experiences and those perspectives. And I think it's very beautiful that in one way or another, we all have engaged with Native art in one way or another in order to find healing, to find community, and to find understanding in some ways. But overall, I think something that I really wanted to, like, I'm just itching to get out of all of you is like the very last question. And depending on how we go on time, answering this last question, afterwards we can return to some of the other ones that we didn't necessarily nail down. So that question would be, if you were able to share any piece of advice to our queer Native youth, what would you tell them? And this could be anything as simple, this could be anything as simple as make sure you open X account before you're 25. Or it could be something more broader, like, here are some, like things that you should probably think about or start to sort through early on, or anything of the sort. And you could sort of like think of this as like advice specifically to me. So I could be like the face, I could be like the face of like the youth in this moment. But overall, just in general, like what if you were talking to your 22-year-old self again, or you may be 22, like maybe just a few months younger than you, like what advice would you have given yourself at this point in time and to get to where you are now?
We're so quiet. Oh my God. Um, I just want to express really quickly, I'm really so grateful for this conversation. What we're talking about is a lot of things that I'm figuring out myself, even. But the one thing that I really resonates for me is that understanding that what's utterly unique to you as an individual, I believe, is the information that's laid out for us about who we are and what we're meant to do here. So because I know that especially for teenagers, isn't it the thing that where it's like, what is it that's makes us feel excuse me, makes us feel different from, but that's really that's the beauty of our lives that we really want to go after, and go there and do that. That's if I could instill in every single person the joy of discovering their uniqueness and being able to see that that's a path that's laid out before us, that would be the one thing that I really want to gift to everyone. So which
I think on what I have to say is that in our language we say that meaning they are not controlling your life, so then you have the opportunity to be who you are and never let anyone control over you. And one of the questions that I always ask myself when I ever go upon my two-spirit identity is ginakwan yung meaning if this person if this person didn't live this way, then who would, take that spot? You know, being as a caring person, being as a two-spirit identity, we have certain roles that specify in our community. And one of my roles as a two-spirit is to create artwork that that my ancestors used to create. So yeah.
Yes, and I love it what everyone's saying. It's so great. And I feel like I'm thinking along the same lines. It's like don't lose that sense of self and uniqueness, because that is like what Penny said, it informs your path or informs who you are. And I think the more you hold on to that, the deeper, I don't know, the deeper your I don't know, the deeper your journey will be, or you'll just hold on to that, because there's just a lot of powers that are trying to take that away. And sometimes that manifests in our communities in hurtful ways. And it's can be a struggle to hold on to that that sense of self, even though it feels different or unwanted, but that is part of who you are in a deep spiritual way. And that I think is tied to art and practice or role in community. And art is role in community. And if you weren't there, like Golga's saying, which was a beautiful, I love what you said. Like who would take that spot and who would be there? It's like kind of every person in community is necessary and has a role to play. And I think the closer you stay to who you are, and those weird things, things that you may think are weird but are just you, um, you'll see that they're important, and they're not just important for you as an individual, but important for the community and for our nations, and for us to progress and continue and to thrive. So.
Thank you so much for that, Kenny and Cookie and Penny. I really love the saying of if no one were to live this way, who would take that spot? Because it's just like a reminder that like you're not out of place. It's that this particular role is so specific and requires a specific amount of skill in order to occupy. And it just like it makes me think of like, you know, when like you're applying for a job, like there's that one job like you see that you really want with like all the benefits that you want. It's like you have to have all of these different skills and responsibilities. It sort of reminds me of that, and it makes you like, instead of feeling out of place, you feel like, oh, I'm a part of a bigger thing, but I, you know, have a specific skill set that is going to be useful to everybody else, that I'm have like the necessary skill and experience in order to do this, instead of feeling completely out of place and almost alien to your own community, which of course we all know can be very isolating. And something that I think is just so beautiful is that I feel like personally why I have looked into Navajo art and ceremony to learn more about what it means to be Natle is specifically because there's so much within the symbolism and within our own like ceremonies and like these little like our designs and everything. I remember everything, like every single little design and every single way that it's done and it's carried out at a ceremony has meaning and symbolism. And a lot of that embraces and celebrates all parts of ourselves. And in the Navajo way, they say the left side represents a man and the right side represents a woman. And therefore, your left side represents your father's lineage, and your right side represents your mother's lineage. And in that way, every person carries a man and a woman along with them, and they occupy sort of both of those roles, and in a certain way, or they're influenced by those roles, I should say. And I think what's really unique about Nagle people in Navajo culture is that we embody that very particular, in Navajo they call it salah, meaning the two are complementing on each other, that both are paired towards one another. And instead of having it framed and understood as a binary, it's understood as like men and women are complementary in that, you know, they're not necessarily opposites, but they're both polars in a grand scheme of the universe, and that all of us embody the very specific things that both of them are sort of associated with, but we all sort of occupy unique space between the two of them, or taking things from the two of them. And I think that almost every part of Navajo symbolism like recognizes that. And so I think that native art in each of our different like cultures in each of our different languages just holds so much symbolism in that way. And I just really appreciate you all for sharing like little bits and teachings of like your own cultures and how that all sort of like coalesces to make this like say like a very similar teaching that we should all continue to, you know, find what is unique about us and continue to stick with that, because it is going to be vital not just to who we are but to our communities. And with that being said, I also wanted to ask, like, um, you know, we've been using the term two spirit, but some of us don't necessarily identify as the same. Like we all, I guess, more or less identify with the term two spirit. or two-spirit community, but we all each probably hold separate identities under like the LGBTQ acronym and like community. And I just wanted to like throw this question out there. It might be a little bit of a messy question, but I feel like often within my own, Indigenous culture, like I have a very specific role and identity, but outside of it, there's so many other like queer identities that people talk about. They're like, oh, okay, like there's sexual orientation, there's gender identity, and there's gender expression. And I guess like how has you being Indigenous influenced the way that you celebrate yourself as a queer person in I guess like in a contemporary sense, but also in just like in non-Indigenous circles? I don't know if that question makes sense, but please let me know if there's anything you would like me to clarify, and I'll do my best.
Actually, this is something I really I've been struggling with and trying to well and here's why. For one thing, like I just don't have the teachings that are coming directly from an elder or a variety of elders in this northwestern Minnesota region, to like what it is to be queer, Indigenous, two-spirit, just to open the whole thing up. Like I don't have someone I can sit with, and receive that information over, like years and years and years. I do remember over 20 years ago, someone I was learning cultural traditions from suggested that I talk to her uncle, who just happened to be in town for like 2 seconds, and he was in the middle of presenting at a conference, and she said, oh, go give him tobacco. He's two-spirit. He can talk to you about being two-spirit. And thinking back on that, it's like, well, he was in the middle of a busy day. He did the best that he could. And all he could say to me was like, go put your tobacco down and just keep asking to have that information revealed to you. And then he's like, and I got to go, and then he was on to, so that's been the extent of like how I've been able to sit and learn from a person. But what I'm understanding for myself is that, and maybe this is why I keep emphasizing the idea of being so unique, is I feel like it is so hugely unique to each individual person. It's like, what is that gift that you bring? And then, how does that express itself, within the community? Because I feel like what is needed is what is brought forward. I have the gifts that my community needs, right? So if I was in a different community, maybe I would have different gifts. And also I feel like also I am a very new Ojibwe language learner. I'm not fluent. I've been studying the language for over 20 years, but I haven't been able to find the language that expresses what is it to be queer in Ojibwe country. So I don't have those words either to talk about. So I kind of I don't put too much emphasis on am I two-spirit, am I not two-spirit, because I feel like that's not my Ojibwe language anyway, so I don't know, it's something I'm struggling with. So I just thank you for bringing it forward. I think it's a conversation that I need to take more part in. Appreciate it.
I'll jump into, yeah, I struggle actually, because I think with the idea of the idea of fitting into like however all the different terms and identities that exist in the contemporary like LGBTQIA spectrum, it still feels very like colonial in a lot of ways, right? The labeling and the this and the that and the boxing and the categorizing. And so I've always really struggled in spaces of that nature that are not native centered. Um, so I find that even today, like I struggle to connect with that community outside of a native context, if that makes sense. So like, but in a native context, like, yeah, I'm like, give me my lesbians, hello girls, and like, let's just, there's a lot of connecting with other, LGBTQ, queer, indigiqueer, two-spirit. Really, I prefer indigiqueer these days because there's just been so much co-opting of and different things. But like I like being in community with other indigenous queer folks, and that where there's kind of a common or maybe shared understanding of the challenges of what it means to be to then go into like a non-native queer space, and you know, the different expectations or assumptions that exist, and the uncomfortability of you know, of being in those spaces, but also holding that my Ipai Kumia identity is who I am, and that's really all there is to it. Like the idea of categorizing based on sexuality and gender, all those things just become very, like, I don't know, jarring. Um, oh gosh, and there was something else I was gonna say, and now I don't know where it went. It went somewhere, but yeah, it's yeah, it's hard, I think, or I'm still kind of um navigating that.
I go with what Penny and Kenny said. It's really challenging for me to pursue the aspect of the actual terminology of Two-Spirit. Since I live in a community of 300 people and there's over 45 villages throughout the Yupik Nation, it's really challenging. The elders really partook in the trending American mainstream, such as, you know, Christianity. Christianity lured so many people that it started from my grandparents. And then from my grandparents, that's when most of the terminologies and the knowledge within the aspect of Two-Spirit um, was disappeared. So there are minimum amount of people out in the Yupik Nation that knows the actual terminology. Excuse me. Although most of the people are more into the Western ideology other than Indigenous ideology. Although the way that my culture works is that Yupik Yupik culture and Western culture are intertwined to a point where when they collided, most of the knowledge of our traditional knowledge was gone. But yeah, I hope to one day to find out that term and what it really means and how they really help my community and what their role is.
Thank you so much to the three of you. I really appreciate everything that you all have said and taken this like conversation. I know, like, I keep smiling and like just sort of like just sitting here and like staring like at this kid, but I'm just like so like warmed by everything that you guys are saying, because I feel like I often have felt like while I was doing my research and while I'm currently here in my community, like I just finished college and I like came back like from Massachusetts, like in Boston, being in a big city, and then like coming here back to the reservation and being with my family, and you know, dealing with like this drastic shift. I feel like I'm going to take a lot from this conversation and remember it for like a good amount of time, actually for a very long time. So I really, again, I just really appreciate it. And I do know we're like just about a minute to 1 o'clock. And I don't want to, I know we have like a little bit of a late start, but I don't want to take more time away from you guys and go over the time. But I just want to very quickly um, ask you all if there's anything else you would like to say or add. And if one of you folks have to hop off, just please let me know and you can go ahead and hop off. But like, just one last thing is like, is there anything you would like to add or say to sort of like wrap up our conversation today?
I'm hoping that these conversations can continue. I think that we could find that we have a deepening understanding that we're able to bring together if we continue to have a conversation over time. So I just wanted to throw that out. And one of the other things I find that I'm required to do, I'm absolutely not saying this is required of anybody else, but I'm required to do. Um, I'm 58 years old. I have stability in like in relationship and housing and transportation and employment. You know, I have stability in my life, so I can do this, but it's required of me to be very visible. And my visibility is required so that other people don't feel that they're alone. And so oftentimes I'm introducing myself, or I'm trying to just work into one-on-one conversations, some reference to, you know, I do XYZ because I find that that's part of my two-spirit, how my art expresses myself as a two-spirit person. And invariably, I'm going to say like 3 or 4 times out of 5, a person will reflect back to me that they are also queer, indigiqueer, two-spirit, that, you know, that they are a Native person who identifies in that way, but they don't feel safe to say it out loud in their lives anywhere. And that they appreciate at least being able to say it out loud to one person. And so that's another aspect of something that how my artwork allows me to bring that information forward to people. So I just want to tell you so much how much I appreciate this conversation. I'm so glad we're doing this today. Miigwech.
Of course, and thank you so much, Penny. I really appreciate your presence here and everything that you contributed to this conversation. And I also really hope that these conversations continue because I've learned a lot just by talking with you folks here today. But also, I think it's like very important, like I just think like these conversations are just like really important because, you know, if we're dealing with these questions at like the ages, you said, Penny, you said you're 50A, and I'm 22, and like I feel like the people who are like much younger than us are probably going to continue to see these questions and come to these questions. And something that I have continuously sort of have had to come to par with during my research, but also just like continuing to do the work of sort of like reclaiming a lot of like queer and indigenous a queer, trans, indigenous, like Navajo knowledge, I guess you could say, is that our ancestors were always dynamic. And then I think a lot of people forget that our ancestors weren't just like a bunch of robots that were all aimlessly like following one group of elders and agreeing with all of their teachings and what they say about two-spirit people, and like everybody comes together and like defines two-spirit, and you know, like none of those things have ever happened. I mean, maybe it has, but there's no sort of like record of that. Um, but something that I like to remind myself is there was probably some amazing trans ancestors that I've had that probably disagreed with a lot of the elders, that probably disagreed with a lot of the medicine people. There are probably medicine people who were queer, who were trans, who didn't agree with, you know, any of this. Or, you know, there are people who probably defiantly said, oh, you're wrong for saying this, you're wrong for this teaching, you're wrong for that. And I think a lot of people forget about those things. It's like in the same way that, you know, all of these, like within Christianity, there's all these different denominations. And in a very similar way, our, you know, the politics and the overall like cultural landscape of our territories were probably very much structured in the same way. I mean, there's a reason why we have different clan systems. There's a reason why we have different teachings. There's a reason why we have different ways of practicing the same thing, different customs for the same ceremonies. And you know, I think it's very beautiful that we can continue to hold that uniqueness and continue to be dynamic. And I think that's something that um, I would like to continue to remember from this conversation. But I'm so sorry. I'm like, continue. I would like to give Ketty and like Cookie any like a chance to say any like last words to sort of wrap up like our conversation. But thank you so much, Penny.
I don't really have any last words, but one of the things that that came to mind when you mentioned about, you know, two-spirit identity and how it plays a major role in our community is that nowadays in this contemporary life, I feel like oppression through sexism has been adopted to many indigenous cultures, and how that terminology has affected so many identities. But yeah, like, what are ways can we decolonize off of that? What research can we have access to? And, all that, all sorts of questions to bring back our who we are and what the role is. And yeah.
Yes. Yes, and which is a theater thing. Yes, and yes, and yes, and I just want to thank you all. I really enjoyed this conversation, and actually, some of the things I feel like I need to hear today, and that's really useful. And I just want to thank you all for that. Especially some of these, like Penny. I have the gifts that my community needs. That's such a beautiful thing to say, and of course, well, Liz, I'm gonna ask you about it later. If you weren't in that place, who would be? I just love that, and I just thank you for making the space to have this conversation. I think we could go on for a long time, and I think that it shows how much these kind of conversations are needed and necessary, especially right now. And hopefully, yeah, more dialogue. And I just wish everyone to, continue doing the work that everyone's doing in their communities, and we're so vast apart. But yeah, so miigwech and Kleonic and Kehan. And that's all for me.
Oh, look at our little polyglot over here. Thank you so much. And you're welcome. Bigahe. Um, well, again, Shahat and Skaggle to all of you again for joining today, for sharing your wisdom, and just for sharing your personality and bringing your energy into this digital space. I know it's very hard to sort of like, bring that enthusiasm when it's online, but I could literally feel it through the screen from the three of you, and I'm really appreciative of all the things that you all have shared. And I think these conversations are very much needed, and I will hopefully continue to see it. And I hope our little conversation will get the ball rolling on like other conversations to come and to happen. And if you folks would like to hold on. I don't know how many folks are tuned into our webinar, but if you would like to, you know, sort of like say that, oh, okay, if you could follow me on social media, you can go ahead and do that. If you would like, because I personally would love to see the artwork that all three of you do. I was like sort of like looking at like the little gallery photos of the things that you guys had as a part of the FPF website, and I was like, oh my gosh, you're like so wonderful. So like, if you have anything to like plug in really quickly, we could do that, and then we'll go ahead and like end the Zoom. But again, just thank you so much for coming here today and for bringing your amazing double spirits here today. And I hope you have like a amazing remainder of the day and have a good start to the week. Yeah.
Koyana Chaknak for giving me this opportunity to share my knowledge and my perspective on the two-spirit identity. I just want to put it out there that my social media is that I mainly go on is Instagram, and it's Kuki92, Quki92, and I post majority of my work on there.
Great.
You can find me mainly on Facebook, and it's Penny Kagagave or Kagagave Quill Boxes. And that's where I'll post photos of my work from time to time when I'm keeping up with it. But I'm very interested in conversations with people all the time. So anybody wants to reach out, that's wonderful.
You can find me on Instagram at KRAYRAMOS, which is just my first initial, my middle name, and my last name. But people think it means Cray all the time, which really infuriates me. But that's what I chose, I guess. So Cray Ramos with a K. But I don't post a lot, but I post on my stories, especially when I'm working. So please engage with me. I would love that. And I can't wait. Well, I already follow Golga, but I need to follow Keana and then Penny.
Okay, the moment that you guys had mentioned your social media handles, I had already followed. That's when I pick up my phone. But again, thank you all. Hope you guys have a great day. so sorry we went over a little bit of time and we had a little bit of technical difficulties at the beginning, but I'm very grateful for the conversation that we still were able to have and sort of like the cool things that came out of it. Again, hope you have a great day and a great, wonderful week.